Oh,
I
okay.
think I brought my little monitor.
Yeah, I like your little monitor. Is that the 4K one you were talking about?
No,
No?
it's unfortunately not. I wanted FHD, but it's not. It's 19 by 12, but it's touch.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
And
Has
what's
it
the
got a built-in
monitor you guys
battery?
got there?
No, it runs off USB-C.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's
Dual
powered.
monitor laptop life, Gordon. This is bonkers.
No, it's just this little tiny. It's really.
That's cute.
Yeah, smaller is better because it's lighter. Originally, I had this like fantasy I was going to run it on my phone, but apparently the Samsung Dex
Oh, yes,
is
Samsung Dex.
so well is everything we've come to expect of Samsung software that it only supports certain resolutions, and 19 by 12 is not one of them. So
Yeah.
everything is stretched out.
All 19 pixels by 12 pixels. We're live.
We
Hello.
are live.
Hello,
Hello.
Internet. We're here with special guest Dean Takahasi.
Hello.
Yeah, glad to have him.
Yeah, this is gonna be good.
Yeah, we're gonna go live pretty soon. We're just hanging out in the pre-show. Gordon was showing off his portable monitor. Do you want to say what kind of monitor it is, or
I have no idea because it's on Amazon. It really could be anybody.
just
But it's nice because it has a tripod mount on the bottom.
Oh yeah, look at
It's
that.
touch,
Nice.
so it works with touch.
Can you get it to be the same angle as your laptop monitor? That's the real test for me.
No, because the worst thing about all these portable monitors, and it's just because there's an overflow of extra laptop screens, is the stands, right? They're always like these fiddly little horrible stands. I kind of wish they would do a Surface like kickstand, but nobody does that, or very few of them. So
Seems
they have
expensive.
these horrible origami folding things, and the angles are very limited, and it always flops over. They're just POSs. So
Dean, are you a laptop guy or a desktop guy?
I have both a desktop and a laptop that I work with in my office here, but I wind up having to go on the road so much. I need to carry two laptops with me.
two laptops. Is it the corporate laptop and personal
I'm
laptop,
just
or
paranoid that there's always going to be like a broken laptop somewhere. Right?
oh?
It happens.
Yeah, you know what I always bring is just a folding keyboard for my phone. That's like if it's that bad, I'll just write it up and on the phone and send it into somebody, and somebody else can put it in the CMS or something. So yeah, that is a fear.
I think the first year I went to E3 without printing out my schedule and having like paper versions of everything, I literally was getting out of the car at the parking lot SFO, and my first gen iPhone slid out of my pocket and the screen exploded and the digitizer was broken to the point that I couldn't complete the swipe to unlock gesture. So I was like, I could just put some tape over this and use it on for the week that I'm at E3, no problem. So I ended up having, and it was when we had suddenly gotten security on our internet stuff, so I couldn't log into my Outlook from down there on on my laptop on the wrong IP address without the VPN, which they hadn't turned on yet. It was a whole disaster. I had to get somebody to FedEx me a new phone.
Dang.
I think last year I left my phone in an Uber as I just went over to the B4 party.
Oh no!
And the next 2 hours trying to get it back.
Did you get it back, or did it just end up
I
being
got
sold?
it back, luckily.
Oof.
Oh, that's good.
Ralph from Assembly helped me out.
I was definitely not your Uber driver because I don't know. I don't know.
He's like, I
There's
didn't
no
see
phone.
Oh man!
You must have dropped in the ground getting out of the Uber.
Dang. Gordon's ruthless. How are the verticals and horizontals looking?
Everything's looking good. We got all the friends in the chat. Lewis Law, hello. Tainted said they've been laptop free since 2017.
Dang. Wow.
Wow.
Oh, that desktop life. Love it.
Huh. No, I just can't. I have to have a laptop. So.
Yeah.
I mean,
when I need one.
It won't replace my desktop, but I got to have.
Then you go outside the house more.
Yeah.
Theoretically, Dean.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
You end up working from worse places, I find. Like I work from the dining room table instead, which is the worst, instead of using a proper desktop with all that. So,
You don't.
But you
pop
know
up
what?
On the couch with your lap desk on your lap. Try
No.
to.
He puts his feet on the couch cross-legged. He loves
God.
using a laptop like that.
I am looking forward, and again, I we'll see what happens with Qualcomm. This is not one of the topics, but I do look forward to see what we're going to get out of those laptops, because we'll see if it's not the usual broken drivers, fans running, and overheating kind of experience that many of us have experienced before. So
We'll see.
all right, but you know what? You're not here to talk about that. You are here to talk about you know what? I think you can, on Disney, you can say it once. The absolute shit show that is the Xbox division for the last week. I've already burned that, but we are here to talk about that. So I'm going to try to save this for after the intro, but we have Dean Takahasi, who's one of the preeminent journalists covering games for VentureBeat and GamesBeat, and has literally written 2 books about it. I'm gonna mention it when we get to the actual show, though, right?
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead, Gordon.
Let's
Whenever
do it.
you're ready.
Oh wait, where are we? Okay, too many screens now. You ready to do this?
Yep.
This is easy though, because it's only like one line. We ready, Willis?
Yep.
In this episode of The Full Nerd, what the frack is going on with the Xbox division? Frack is okay. Battlestar Galactica.
Works. It works.
Watching it on
Yeah.
Prime. Welcome to episode 301 of The Full Nerd. I'm your host, Gordon Maung, with co-host, and Patrick Murray sitting next to me.
Hello. Welcome.
We also have our special guest, Dean Takahasi, writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat.
Yeah, thank you, and glad to be here.
Thanks. And, of course, Will Smith with all kinds of cool stuff in the background there.
I got the background. Like Dean's braver than I am. I don't do the green backgrounds anymore. It's too scary. People just put stuff up behind you all the time. You have no idea what they're going to put there.
You can put the Cuphead stuff behind me.
Yeah, Willis could be completely out of control right now, but he's restrained.
Watch out.
And, of course, Willis Lai is controlling the horizontal and vertical.
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Adam, we do need that censor button right here on the producer.
We
desk.
really
Just
do, yeah.
Beep, beep, beep. Yeah,
Yeah.
we just lost that Disney sponsorship.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I'm always afraid I'm going to slam my fist onto my laptop instead of the desk here.
See, this is why I do the iPad, Gordon, because then there's nothing to break. It's just a little foldy keyboard, and that thing's indestructible.
Yeah, I guess. But, I will say, again, this is an 8th gen laptop. It's ancient. It is a commercial laptop. It's an HP EliteBook Dragonfly. I love this thing. I'm sure I could pound on it. It would survive. So it's built for IT environments. So which is IT, people don't know commercial laptops are built for workers who don't give a damn about your hardware. Like you pay for it, you buy it at Costco, like, I got to buy another one if I break it. If I get this from work, I don't know, it stopped working. What's this big ass dent in the corner? I don't know. You must have, you gave it to me like
Normal wear and tear.
that's
Fate.
how IT departments deal with
Yeah.
all their workers. But the real reason we're here, though, is again to talk about. I burned one of the allowed curse words again,
I don't think you're allowed.
but it's been a complete shit show for the Xbox division. I have no idea. Again, I'm not a console gamer. I really don't know what the hell's going on. But I really want to talk to somebody who really does. And I'm going to introduce, again, Dean Takahasi. He is the primary writer for GamesBeat over at VentureBeat. He's been writing about games and technology longer than I have, which is like there's very few people that are around that have been doing that. Former Wall Street Journal, former Mercury News, and literally has written 2 books on the Xbox. By the way, you can get them on Amazon. I bought one of them last summer when I thought I was going to be able to read it. Opening the Xbox, Inside Microsoft's Plan to Unleash an Entertainment Revolution. And the other book is the Xbox 360 Uncloaked, the real story behind Microsoft's next generation video game console. So Dean is literally written. Oh, there it goes. See, I'm going to, next time I see Dean, I'm going to bring it and he's going to sign it. So that's a cheap way you get the signed editions. But, I think Dean is somebody that I wanted to hear about the total mess that is going on with Xbox. I've listened to a lot of Xbox talk shows. I've been watching some YouTube videos, but I will summarize it as this. After closing a not $69 billion deal, but closing its $75 billion deal, because apparently in the year and a half it took to close the deal to buy Activision Blizzard King, it went up $6 billion. How the hell that happened, I don't know. Everybody thought, oh, great, good stuff now. But last week, Microsoft dropped an anvil on everybody's heads by announcing that 3 studios were shut down. Arcane Austin, developer of Redfall, Tango Gameworks, developer of Hi-Fi Rush, Alpha Dog Games, developer of Mighty Doom, and they also just I guess just to like, hey, you know what? We're not going to shut them all down, but they're going to demote Roundhouse Studios. They're going to be absorbed into ZeniMax Studios to work on basically on an online version. And I will say, watching from afar the Xbox podcast, every single Xbox fan is in full on the end is nigh mode. People are like, this is it. Microsoft is screwing us again. They're screwing up. We love these developers, and you're blowing this. So I got to kick this off, Dean. What the frack is going on over there? Because you thought like, wow, you closed this tremendous deal, but then you start shutting down studios. Everybody's really scared crapless that like other developers are getting shut down, and people are like, what is going on? What the hell? Like, was it really worth this to get Activision Blizzard King?
So maybe I would start with a controversial sentence. Like it makes you think nice things to say about Bobby Kotick, I guess. but yeah, it is I guess shocking and surprising that they would still have to take this extra step after already announcing that they were going to have 1,900 layoffs before this, right? I mean, Activision wasn't that huge when they bought it, but 14,000 employees or so, right? This is the value that you buy when you acquire a game publisher, a game company with lots of studios. That they also bought Bethesda, right? And so then, why would you do that and pay such a high price when this is like one of your first steps? And I think what happened was it took so long to buy them, to get the approval from the government and governments around the world because of the antitrust concerns, that the market changed by the time they closed the deal back in October. And so their plans for this at the time were, probably big plans and expansion oriented. But when they came out of that whole process, I think they found, it's a totally different market. It's stalling, and we're not doing so good within the stalling market. So.
And is that just generally, because I mean, to be fair to Microsoft, there have been layoffs throughout the industry. So it's not just simply the Microsoft-owned studios.
Yeah, 10,500 last year, and probably about 10,000 so far this year in 4 months.
And would you agree that a lot of this is because clearly there was an overhiring during the pandemic because everybody was stuck at home, everybody was playing video games, a lot of studios bulked up, and then it feels like nobody wants to play video games suddenly.
One piece of it that's a big piece of it. Everybody hired up and expanded. The game venture capitalists by the dozens arrived and started investing a lot of money into all these studios, brand new ones, and then you had the costs sort of go out of control as well, like interest rates, add to costs. Anybody borrowing money all of a sudden has a big problem, and then the demand also stalled because there was an end to this pandemic boom where you had 30% user growth back in 2020, but that has dried up because people are going back to outdoor things, and they're going back to travel, back to other distractions that get them away from gaming, and so the hours they're playing per week is probably a number that is stalling in some way. And so I think Phil Spencer brought this up, the first time he talked about how, we're in a funk in the industry. He didn't, he left it to Matt Booty, I think, to talk about this latest round. But yeah, there's all these problems. I think one of the things that sort of was a red flag for me before they did these layoffs, or studio closures, was that AMD was talking about their earnings and saying that the game part of like they had a stellar quarter thanks to AI chips, but they had gaming fall 48% in Q1 compared to a year ago, And they said that they expect gaming to fall further in Q2. And then the thing that surprised me was that, and in the second half of the year, it's going to be worse. Like everything I had sort of been imagining in my head was that things were just going to get better. Like, I mean, we had such a terrible year or terrible 18 months here in games, right? Things can only get better. But no, AMD is just looking at what kind of chip sales and chip orders are coming in for the consoles and for PC rigs, and I think they're sort of expecting now that the second half is almost like any fifth year of a console life cycle, which is downward, right? And that's that timing, it sort of caught up with us. I didn't realize that these consoles are getting old. So that cycle, part of the cycle, is having such a sort of bad second half of this year, kind of snuck up on me.
Do you think it's a little oversimplification though? Because a lot of people, I've heard some people go like, well, this is just because, people are not buying consoles now because, they know they're old. There's going to be a replacement. So everybody's holding that. I do wonder if there's something deeper going on here rather than just simply the traditional, let's wait for a new console I don't want to buy now. Because I don't think most people are that sophisticated to know.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you remember the first couple of years of this cycle too, was a shortage, like, extreme shortage due to the pandemic of the supply chains getting messed up everywhere. And these machines not shipping because one or two of the 2,000 parts or so was in short supply, and they couldn't ship the whole machine as a result. And so like that went on for so long, and it restrained all of the sales and the demand early in the cycle. And so it was nice to finally get over that, but only to realize then now that the demand is not as big as the last generation, or it's just stalling.
Do you believe that whatever PS5 Pro that's rumored to come out will help stimulate some of that growth, and maybe Microsoft is going to miss out on that mid-cycle refresh?
Yeah, definitely. If it does make it out the door this year, then that is really, I think, something that's going to help. It's going to help Sony for sure, and I think Nintendo Switch 2, when it arrives, is going to help the market a lot, as well, probably a lot more. But yeah, where does that leave Microsoft? Like, I think when those documents leaked way back when, during the antitrust proceedings, the indication was that Xbox wasn't going to ship a new generation until 2028, right? And that's a long way away when the market is already starting to slow, right?
I wondered how much of this is a result of Microsoft's shift to services with this generation too. Like, we've seen Game Pass, like, was momentarily a force, but now like there's a perception, at least in the indie community, that you don't really sell games on Game Pass anymore, on Xbox anymore, compared to PC and Steam and Switch. And I wonder, like, if this is like how much, like, it seems like Microsoft's strategy should be the inverse, rather than shutting studios that are making small and critically acclaimed games. It seems like those should be the things that they should be investing more in. And I wonder whatever your take on that is, Dean.
Well, I do feel like we're getting less and less information than we used to about what the state of the market is. Like, NPD sales captures a smaller and smaller slice of what gets played, and things in the subscription in Xbox Game Pass are kind of a black hole for us, right? And so all I can see is some qualitative statements, like Matt Piscatella from Circana, not NPD anymore. He did say that he believes that Game Pass is stalling, right, and that subscriptions are not gaining as nearly as much as they were. And then it does leave very interesting questions about whether they're going to throw in a bunch of Bethesda and Activision Blizzard games into this, and especially Call of Duty, right? So
I was going to say, like, if this is I mean, Activision tried to make Call of Duty a subscription game for 10 years, a decade ago. And I wonder if the purchase is them saying, oh, Game Pass is your Call of Duty subscription now. We don't need to invest in games like, Prey and Hi-Fi Rush and things like that. That would be, I think, a big loss for both people who have Game Pass and for games in general.
I mean, I think back in some history, like thinking about these books I've written in the past too, where there were different archetypes of leaders within Xbox, and we've now had generations of these leaders, right? So Phil Spencer is just the latest, right? But they used to have different people for the different roles. Like, so Robbie Bach, the chief gaming officer, was the business guy, right? And then you had Seamus Blackley, who was like a developer-focused person. You had Jay Allard, who was the shipper of products, and Ed Fries, who was, managing the publishing portfolio. And you had these conflicts between them all the time about things like how fast should we ship out the next Halo game? Like, and Jay and Robbie would pound on Ed and say, "You got to ship this thing now. We need this. We need this for our next Xbox 360 console, right?" And then, and Ed on his side doesn't know what's going to be a hit, and so he has to invest in dozens of games in order to make sure they get the one, big hit game. Unfortunately, they did with Halo, but they go through these expansions and contractions all throughout this history. And there was one period where I think they had expanded quite dramatically to 1,200 developers within Xbox. But at that point in time, if you looked over at Sony, you saw they had 2,500 developers, right? And so like twice as many developers. Nintendo probably more as well, but didn't really reveal their numbers. But they were a company of like 5,000 people at that point in time. And then you sort of come to the conclusion that Microsoft is not in this game to win, because look at those numbers, like look. And so I think when Xbox Game Pass came along as the idea, Microsoft through Phil Spencer finally said, we're going to have to play this game to win. And we're going to go buy up as much as we can of this industry. And they started, small with things like In Exile, right, and Double Fine, and then they got Bethesda, and now Activision Blizzard, just in time for a big, unprecedented industry slowdown. So, in some ways, their timing has turned out to be terrible, I think. And why they have to go and cut these studios, though, I think maybe it says a bit more about how the middle part of the game industry is a real problem right now. Like we have, indies are doing their thing. They're always there. They're coming out with, I don't know, games like Helldivers 2, I guess, right? But a lot of the games like, say, Hi-Fi Rush, even, like considered to be not a success, given the fact that they had been praising it a little while ago. The studio that made the Evil Within, not cutting, not pulling its weight. I think there's sort of something mass going on here, that they realize we have such a big problem that the only thing we can do is just chop these things with an axe, and no longer, do they think about things like what's the right game and the right thing level of investment for a category like strategy games or real-time strategy. Like, can you imagine how well something like that would survive in the portfolio that they have today, where they're thinking like everything has to be a Call of Duty, right? There's no room for the small real-time strategy games.
Well, the follow-up question I have is, I mean, there is a lot of people, aiming this at Matt Booty or Phil Spencer. Like, Where in the management stack do you think all of these things are happening, or do you think it goes all the way up to Satya Nadella?
Well, I think Satya had come out with his own comments in either recently or in the past about how he is not micromanaging his divisions, right? And so I think everybody knows at the very end of the day, Microsoft has to do things to please the shareholders, right? And then I don't know what the day-to-day conversations are like, say, between Phil Spencer and Satya. Does Phil feel the pressure from Satya to perform and to get his division into shape? Yeah, it's probably a lot of that self-driven, but is Satya ordering these layoffs to happen or these closures to happen? I don't think so, right? I think they're concluding that within the division itself. You think about Microsoft's position now as a company, it's so accelerated by AI, and they're doing so well. Like, their value as a company, exceeds that of Apple's, right? It's a crazy time for the success that Microsoft is having. When you think about how much money and profit they're making now, do they really have to go shut down 4 studios, right?
Yeah, and I think definitely that seems to be what's driving a lot of the anger at the reception of the shutdown of these studios is, they were praising them just last year, like Tango with Hi-Fi Rush, and then now basically they're shutting them all down. And a lot of the theories I've seen is people saying this is coming from up top. This is not, because definitely there's, Sarah Bond and, Phil, they were saying things that are completely counter to what's happening now. So that's why a lot of the theories are like, oh, this is coming all the way from the top of the boardroom.
Yeah.
And you just don't buy into that theory, though, it sounds like.
Well, I do think that there's like some kind of nasty surprise they've got. And it must have come suddenly. I don't know whether it's the stalling, the sort of theoretical stalling of, Game Pass, or worse than expected news for the second half of the year, but something has made them take swift action, even compared to just a couple of months ago when they had decided, like, you don't want to do your layoffs in batches, right? You want to do them all at once when you need to, right? So just a short time ago, they did 1,900 layoffs after closing the deal. And now, we're coming back at it again. So it feels like there's something gone wrong with the plan that surprised them a whole lot. And, I think that, not to go out and say I'm the biggest defender of Bobby Kotick out there, but he didn't do this kind of thing, right? When was the last time you heard of Activision shutting something completely down, right? So what he did, originally, like, say, in building up Call of Duty, was start with Infinity Ward, right? And then he tripled it up to 3 studios, right? You got Sledgehammer, Treyarch, and they were support studios for a while, but then they each became a producer of an annual Call of Duty game, and that was a huge leveling up of the bet. He lost the founders of Infinity Ward in a lawsuit over this kind of strategy, but you could look at that and say that was the right strategy to pursue at the time. And then now at this state where we've got a need for thousands of Call of Duty game developers, because of things like Warzone, and Call of Duty Mobile, or Warzone Mobile now, they ratcheted that up to 10 studios, right? And so, like, they would take a studio like Toys for Bob, which it ran through the Skylanders craze, right, up and down. At that point, you could say, well, Skylanders is dead. Let's shut down Toys for Bob. But they didn't do that, right? They reassigned Toys for Bob to become a Call of Duty studio. And I'm sure not a lot of people were happy about that, working for Toys for Bob, right? But it's better than being shut down, right? And so then, this is the kind of thing you do if you have a lot of time on your hands to see what's happening and adjust, because Activision Blizzard's I guess mode of operating was always really to throw a lot of things out, figure out what was working, and then get totally behind whatever was working to the detriment of everything else, right? And it's a reasonable strategy for game companies to pursue. Right now, I think from what it was nice they reassigned the one studio to work on ZeniMax Online, right? But to close 3 studios instead of taking those studios and reassigning them to all the work that you think they need to be on, like Fallout 5, right? Or the next Halo, right? More people on Call of Duty, right? They could have used all of the hundreds of people that just lost their jobs, right?
The thing about those kind of transitioning Treyarch off of Tony Hawk onto COD, or Toys for Bob onto COD, that always felt a little bit to me like a layoff that they didn't have to pay severance for, because they just assumed the people who didn't want to go over there would pull the ripcord and go find other jobs.
Yeah.
So like I don't know if I necessarily agree. Like I don't know that feels like a good thing to me for the people working there.
A very good view of talent, right?
Yeah.
When in the ideal situation, the talent should be the ones choosing what to do and what to work on, and you listen to them. You don't simply just reassign them, right? So yeah, you're right.
I was going to say that the larger issue for me with the current wave of Microsoft is that they don't seem to have any ability to generate first party like high impact first party titles. You look at Halo Infinite kind of fizzling. You look at things like Gears being moribund. You look at the franchises that built that console. Your Dead Risings. Where are your Dead Risings in this generation? We haven't seen anything that makes people say, "Oh, I've got to get an Xbox to play this game." And part of it is they're releasing all their games on the PC, I guess. But it also seems like there's just nothing coming out of Microsoft that they want to switch these teams over to, if that was an option.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that some of the games franchises are so big that they really don't have enough developers, right? I mean, I would guess that they could use all the Halo developers that they could get their hands on, and who knows what's going on? Like, the logical thing to do with Halo is to turn it from a once every 5 years game into an everyday game, just like what happened with Call of Duty and Warzone, right? And that that creates a huge beast for you throw developers into that fire, right? You have to keep that content coming. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what's again, I feel like there is a bit of a black hole here, or a black box that we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, there's there's been rumors of additional shutdowns possibly coming and layoffs. We don't know. That's just could be the internet just simply running wild with its imagination. But it does make me wonder whether this is the end of Xbox, right? Because definitely that's what a lot of people have been sort of venting, like this is it. There's no longer an Xbox. At least the spirit of it's gone. But frankly, it does make you wonder if this is like they're just going to give up on making an actual, I hate to use the word bespoke console, but you know what? Maybe they just want to sell games on other platforms and to everybody, or doing a pure streaming option. I mean, what are your thoughts on? Is that overreaction? Could this literally be the end of the Xbox, or the people are just freaking out?
I mean, Xbox, if you look at the, I don't know, last 10 years or so, they are making money by the billions, right? And so, they have bad years every now and then. Things slow down. And so I would just remember that they're not nearly as vulnerable as they used to be, right? When they were just starting out. Like the first 4 years of the original Xbox, they lost $4 billion, right? It's like wrapping around $125 around every single machine you sell and shipping that out. and uh, and so you know, I don't think things are that dire, and that if you just start shipping some of the things that you have, uh, then things should be good or return to normal. I mean, um, they you see the potential of what they have with the success of the Fallout TV show, right? And that is a demand generator that they didn't have before, but now they can turn to it every now and then and say, yeah, maybe they need to make the Halo show a little better, but but the Fallout show had 65 million people watching it, and a lot of them for the first time. It generated all this demand for these 10-year-old Fallout games, and to coordinate that a little better with the launch of something like Fallout 5, right? That would be awesome, and that would be a spectacular business. I think that they would have. It's just I think it's like Warner Brothers too. Like when they were smaller, they would lose money while they didn't have a big giant Batman game to ship, right? But when they did, it started to look like genius. Like, well, wow, they're the only Hollywood studio with 10 different studios under their wing now, and they can consistently report good years, right? And Microsoft is well beyond that size, where they ought to be able to ship things much more frequently. And I don't know why it sort of feels like it's slowed down instead, right? And things are not getting out the door when they should. I mean, in some ways, you do want to give the developers all the time they need in order to get the game done, because nobody wants to force you to ship a game that's buggy, right? And so in some ways, we're all impatient waiting for these things, when it could be that they are making some of the right decisions to let these developers cook their stuff until it's done, right? But Starfield, it did have a fair amount of bugs when it shipped, and probably didn't sell as well as they expected it to or wanted it to. I don't think that like the business is in such terrible shape that they need to get out of hardware, right? I mean, I think they've been able to demonstrate that they could make a ton of money in third place, right?
The big question I have is if Starfield really sold at all. I mean, it seems like they're trading the traditional boom and bust game cycle for, hey, get $15 a month from 10 to 30% of the overall console market, right?
Yeah. I mean, you would have thought that one of the purposes of the subscriptions was to smooth the flow of revenues out, so that people are always paying this amount of money, and you never have these peaks and valleys like you do when you ship a game or don't ship a game. It is a good question. Like, Netflix is getting heavily into games right now as well, with dozens of games, especially mobile games, shipped already, and they're not charging for them, and they are not spelling out how much money they're making from them, right? They're dishing out a lot of money. Has it gotten them a single new subscriber? I mean, I think the way to think about subscriptions is like when we had cable, I couldn't get rid of it. Like I couldn't get rid of the 100 or so channels that I had, because my kids wanted to watch Disney, right? They wanted to watch Disney, and they wanted to watch the Warriors basketball, and so I was stuck. Like because those things were there, I had to keep on paying every month. I would never get rid of it, and I don't know how that equation works for something like Game Pass, that is sort of so much more massive amounts of content, right?
I mean, that does beg the question, though: is a dream of Netflix gaming, is it sustainable? Because I mean, a lot of people are like, there's some questions whether Call of Duty will even go into Game Pass day one. Although I guess they said all games would go in there, but You just paid $75 billion for something. It's better to make $70 off of it rather than hoping that somebody sticks around for a few months to play it. Or, and then also there have been, reports that the subscriptions that have drastically slowed. I think it's plateaued at about 25 million. PlayStation's, I think they're about 40 million. Is it really even the right path to even pursue rather than just simply trying to sell the game itself? Does it make sense as a business? Because I mean, it's a lot of money to license all that content and then to build that content for $10 to $15 a month. I don't know if that's really sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, it is a way to get further out into the cross-platform world, I guess, and to have their stuff on PCs, to theoretically get it onto something like Nintendo, or to get it onto Sony, and to keep away the antitrust regulators, right? They always have to think about that. Like, if they, had huge exclusives on their hands, like Call of Duty, which was a big part of the antitrust proceedings, do you share that out? They decided to share it out because of the risk that deal was not going to close and that the antitrust people would come after them, right? And they don't want that for sure. And so maybe it's not sort of the wisest business decision, but it is also driven by the practical reality of dealing with the regulations in the United States, right? So I don't know. Yeah, sometimes it may be possible for other reasons to override what makes most sense for the business.
We got a $5 Canadian super chat from Skeet Sayer, friend of the show. Thank you so much. Said, for me, Game Pass is the worst thing in the industry. Brand new games that you can play for free on day one. It's not really free, but and the dev gets no $70 US sales day one. Do you think all of these companies that are dealing with Game Pass look at it like that it's like, oh man, we could be selling this. Why are we even on Game Pass? Or do you think they see a benefit?
I mean, I think they tried to explain at one point why it was a good idea to do Game Pass, and that was to look at the activity of each gamer and notice that they were willing to play lots more games and try lots more things out because they had this flat fee subscription, and so they got their money's worth better. And that turned out to be more payments for game companies and, better monetization for those games. I guess that's the theory, right? And has it worked out? Does it work that way? Who makes money? I think quite often you hear the opposite. You hear complaints from individual developers that the stuff that comes in through these subscriptions back to us, isn't that much of a payoff. And for each developer, each company, then they have to make that calculation. Do we go with Microsoft and allow them to do this and put this into? It's almost like back in the day, the same people had the same concerns about Steam, right? And should we let our game onto Steam? Then we lose control over lots of things, right? So,
there's a calculus there, right? There's a what am I getting back from exposing my game to this large platform, and what am I losing for PCWorld and like a game like Helldivers? It requires a large multiplayer player base. It seems to make sense to open up to that Game Pass, because then at least rather than going free to play, instead of having a whole bunch of people who pay nothing, you have a whole bunch of people who paid somebody something, and then you presumably get something back or got something up front or whatever the terms of your individual deal were. The other question, I wondered if you feel like the change in pricing structure, like the expectation for pricing on games seems to have changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of years as well, where we're seeing a lot of value at $10, which was previously kind of a value area, with games like Lethal Company and content warning and stuff like that coming out in that price range, and even like PCWorld and Helldivers, which I think would have been AAA, $50 to $60 games a couple of years ago, launched at $30, and if that's impacting the perceived value of Game Pass as well.
It could be. I mean, I do think I remember Matthew Ball writing a pretty long story about sort of the troubled and sort of great state of gaming in 2024, and it was a very good sort of breakdown of all the cost increases that have happened over time, and the inability to go higher, like from 60 to 70, was one of the huge problems that he pointed out. I mean, he didn't necessarily note how liberating this might be for some folks who were thinking about going lower with lower prices on games. And you do see when somebody misprices a game that there's a huge kind of backlash, right? And so I think just that decision of how to price things is getting more difficult for developers. And yeah, it's probably is true then that this is something that's not good for Xbox or for Game Pass. That why pay the $15 a month when I can get good value for something that I really want at that $15 price, right? So I don't know. I mean, the other thing that's happened to the industry is free to play, right? Free to play has boomed. I am wondering what is still going to happen with Web3 games, blockchain games, because the people who are advocating for those games looked back at the free to play era and the beginning of mobile, and how all of the hardcore gamers hated that stuff, right? And really thought that was the death of the industry. And what happened in the last 10 years was the industry, the number of gamers in the industry grew 10 times, right? Because of free to play. And free to play is the biggest part of game revenues now. Mobile is the biggest part of game revenues now. The people who are advocates for Web3 are the ones who say, we have some of the answers. We're going to get you more money than what you were getting with free to play.
Can I ask you to explain the concept? Because frankly, I'm not all up on this. What's Web3 and the blockchain game mean? Because it sounds like something silly like an NFC or something. But
yeah, I mean, the earlier ones were selling their own tokens ahead of time, right? And this turned out to be not such a great idea because a bunch of scammers mimicked that model and said, like it was kind of more like a Kickstarter plus kind of model where, we don't have the money to make this game, but we're going to sell a bunch of tokens and we're going to raise the money to make this game, and then, get something AAA quality out a few years down the road. Sort of too many of the problem there was too many were scams, right? And then it sort of just poisoned that whole market and turned off almost all gamers against, especially in the West, against this. But back in Asia, they are actually embracing it more. Places like Vietnam, right? It's become very favored sort of kind of model. We got crappy games at first. Those games over time, they have different ways to monetize. That you can sell those tokens, right? You can give something to someone that is permanent for them. The NFTs associated with it, the reporting on a blockchain, make it clear that you own this thing, and then you can resell that thing. And if you can resell it and get value out of it, then maybe you're more willing to pay more for it up front. It generates more revenue for that individual developer. And if that works, then some of these problems that we're talking about go away, which is the inflation of the cost of making games, and the cap on prices. Like, you can never charge more than $70 for a hardcore game, right? That's not true with some of these other games that are more like a free-to-play like model. And if you choose, certain gamers are just going to invest a lot more money into these games. So I don't know whether it hasn't paid off in any way the way people expected it to 3-4 years ago, right? But it's not dead yet. And now some of the games that have been in the works for 4 or 5 years, they're actually starting to ship. In fact, there's one called Guild of Guardians, created by the guy who made, Magic the Gathering Arena for a blockchain company, Immutable Games. Are shipping today, right? After 4 years of development of this mobile game. We'll see how it does.
That's a new concept. So
Yeah.
new one on me.
Yeah.
I want to bring up Sony, because there's a lot of people who are saying, hey, you know what, Sony isn't in a great spot either, just compared to Microsoft. Their press isn't as bad. How much do you think Sony is going to gain from this negative momentum on the Microsoft side?
I guess it depends on what they have to ship, right? I think Helldivers 2 and PalWorld took off because there was nothing shipping, right? Sony now has some of the same problem that Microsoft has, which is, what have you done for me today? The gamers asked, right? So Sony can benefit. They also seem to be in a better position always, because they have higher sales of PlayStation consoles. They have twice as many fans that way. They don't have, say, as large a stronghold in the PC market, and they often are showing they don't know what to do in the PC market too, like with the Helldivers 2 fiasco that just happened. So they need to not make mistakes like that. VR hasn't turned out the second time around the way they expected it to turn out as well, I think. And they don't have they have a lot of other businesses, but they don't have a gigantic AI business that's going to carry them through this the way Microsoft has, right? That's the thing about Microsoft, is that I think they need to let up a bit and give Xbox a little bit of slack, because they are making huge amounts of money on the AI side. I mean, you don't see Nvidia cutting off the sales of GPUs for games because they're doing so well making Grace Hopper for AI customers, right? I mean, I think they both realize that there are cycles here, and maybe the AI boom is not going to last forever, and gaming is probably going to come back, right? Sony has to depend on things like motion pictures or music to sort of be on a different kind of cycle than the games business. But, that one's a little harder to see. That it does feel like Sony's dependence is all on games.
Dean, how does this happen every console generation? We reach this point in the console generation. I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and it's always every 7 years it's a surprise when we reach the 5th year, and it's like, oh man, this whole market's collapsed. All the analysts are like, oh, we got to tank everybody's stock. We're gonna slam. Like, why does this happen over and over? It's like the worst case of Groundhog Day ever.
Yeah. Well, we had divergence from that once every 5 years model, and that maybe has confused some people, I think. So like the Switch, right? The Switch is 2014, right?
13, 14, yeah.
Yeah, 10 years in, and they're finally thinking about replacing it. And so like that's the stellar example of almost not necessarily what you hope, but the business becomes better if you can make that console last that long, right? You always lose money during the period when you're shipping brand new hardware, right? And the less you have to do that, and the more your installed base grows, the more developers can say target the biggest possible mass market, the better. And so ideally, I guess if you never had to replace the console, then that's the best business model. But yeah, we all know that these things run out of gas when it comes to technology, right? And so, um, but PlayStation 4 also great run, right? And so it maybe confuse people into thinking that maybe the 5 year cycle has disappeared or it's gone.
Well, there's also a lot more overlap too because of the cross gen. I mean, we're just now kind of starting to see the first not cross gen titles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and speaking of hardware, because we always have to talk about hardware here. How much of a mistake was it for basically both of the big consoles, Xbox and PlayStation, to basically be the same? They're the guts of a PC. They're all made by AMD. I kind of wonder if that really bit them in the butt, because what the hell's the difference between an Xbox and a PlayStation, except that one has the Sony OS and one has the Microsoft OS on it. I mean, it feels like there's just no distance between both of them, and a lot of people just like I don't care, right? I'm just surprised that they are so similar. Like, I know PlayStation is perceived to be slightly better, but the fact that they're basically based on commodity PC hardware feels like it's something at part of the problem here too, to me.
I guess it sounds like a bad idea to have two consoles based on the same technology until you think about what happened before. What happened before was you would get these weird things like cell processors that nobody on the Sony side liked programming for, or understood, even, like coming at a time with like the sort of predating all the multi-core era. Like, where was the multi-core software, right? Who knew how to create such software? So normalizing on x86 and AMD turned out to be actually a good thing that took a lot of risk out of the industry. Like, I mean, remember how delayed Sony's PlayStation 3 was because of the challenges with the cell processor, right? So that's that's the good side of standardizing on AMD. I mean, Nintendo is they got NVIDIA at least, right? But I do think that then you get new problems, like you mentioned here, that everything starts to feel a bit generic on the technology side. There's nothing different about them. So they try to tune parts of this to whatever they think they want to make their big bets on. Sony bet heavily on exclusives, right, and single player games, and that that has done very well for them. God of War, things like that, and I think Xbox sort of went the other direction. It's like, oh, we don't need exclusives as much anymore, or it seems that's the impression that gamers have, that they've gone that direction. I mean, they still do. They still have Halo. They now have Call of Duty, right? But they are also much more interested in grabbing all the revenue they can coming in for a game across all platforms. Like, I think if you thought about Sony sometimes, like, because they're only making a game for one console, they get a third of the total available market, or maybe a quarter if you think about PCs too, right? If you took that same game and pushed it out on all the consoles, you'd get 4 times as much money, and your break even and the amount of people that you could throw onto developing that game, goes way much higher, right? And so it's taking some of the risk out, and Microsoft is looking at that and saying, do we have to be the suffering first party that loses money on a bunch of games just because we artificially restrict the market to one console? What if we opened up? We're more open. I mean, I think you have to praise that part of Microsoft's strategy, which is being more open. Sometimes forced to do so by someone like Epic, right? But still more open than the other rivals, and that maybe that's part of their strategy that in the long run could pay off. And so I think things feel like they are heading into more openness across the tech industry, or at least there's this awareness that you don't want to get locked in to things, right?
Is there a possibility they could use that as a cudgel against, Nintendo, which is far more closed, and as well as against Sony in any kind of regulatory issues? They're saying, hey, look, you can get our games anywhere. We're very open. Could they make those pitches if Sony or Nintendo try to buy anybody? Like they're essentially closed marketplaces, very much like Apple, and we think this is anti-consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be the strategy long term?
Yeah, I mean, I look back on one of the most interesting moments in history was with Fortnite, right? And what happened with how that game became crossplay, cross-platform crossplay. And before it wasn't possible, and like every company, Epic suffered from that. The developer suffered, but once they say convince Microsoft to go cross-platform and to allow players on Xbox to play against players on other platforms, and it's the rare occasion of a game where everybody has to have it. Everybody wants to play that game. All of a sudden, the power was in the hands of the developer, Epic Games. They could go to Sony and say, "Look, you make this cross-play, or you don't get Fortnite." And Sony has to do that calculation. What happens if they pull Fortnite off of the PlayStation, right? And Sony grudgingly says, "Okay, make it we're making crossplay," and Nintendo as well. And the result is a market where people can play crossplay with their friends, and then it's a much happier market, and it's a much bigger market. And so Epic turned Fortnite into a much bigger game by doing this hard work of forcing people to be more open and to allow crossplay. Like that kind of moment almost never happens in the history of developers and platforms, right? And so I'm a fan of Epic on that front, right, for sure. And I think the big platform companies have to take that into account. They have to take into account the best interests of the developers, and in this case, with Fortnite, it was the best interest of players, right?
I'm just kind of envisioning the EU sticking its nose in and saying, "Hey, Nintendo, you need to make this Mario game available everywhere." Because the EU, as we know, likes to stick its nose into everything. So,
I mean, I think they still do operate on a lot of the antitrust principles, where if Nintendo ever got to the point where it's the dominant part of the market, then yes, you attract the attention of the antitrust regulators, who will force you to do things like that. But while they're not there, and they're a smaller part of the market, I mean, you would definitely see that happen, say, if all of a sudden Microsoft decided to buy Nintendo, and then all of a sudden there's even greater concentration of power in the hands of one company. And then regulators will look at that and say, either we're not going to allow that, or if we allow it, we're going to do the things that we made you do with Call of Duty. Like, the Call of Duty had to get licensed out to Nintendo and to Ubisoft and others, right, in order to allow that deal to go through.
Anybody? I was going to ask another one.
I got some questions from the chat. I will say we got a $2 Canadian super chat from a friend of the show, Skeetsayer. Said, "For me, Humble Choice is the one of the bright spots of getting bundled gaming, or subscription gaming. Good stuff." And then I've got some pointed questions on Discord. Unless you had a follow-up question for what he was talking about.
No, I was going to ask something else, but we should let the audience ask, because I don't want to hog all of Dean's time.
Well, here's one from friend of the show, Ivan R. asked a question for Dean. Did seasonal Steam sales have they ruined the game development industry? In other words, is it possible to sell a game at full price in 2024?
I mean, for as long as I can remember now, people have been complaining about Steam's power to do this, I guess, right? And to take a game that's selling for $60 and say, hey, it's a sale, for a day you can buy it for $10. And um, they would only do that if gamers really liked it. Like, if they gravitate to these sales. And I think developers in that sense, have to think about more than themselves. They have to think about consumers and what their behavior is and what they want. And if they want these sales to happen, then they're going to happen, whatever platform it is, right? And yeah, it just makes you think that there are so many ways to sell something, and every store is going to try its own strategy towards maximizing those sales in different ways and doing things that the other stores don't do.
Simon Carless does a great newsletter where he talks about pricing and sales on games for developers. If you're interested in that as a topic, he does a pretty deep analysis of like how things are charting to figure out how much money you make on launch, how much money you make on sales, to give kind of informed, just in general, if it's a thing people are curious about. Highly recommended.
Yeah, that does sound interesting.
I have a developer question. Should I? I'm gonna jam this in there. This can go to you, Will, because you worked the developer side. Dean, you've covered games developers for a long time. Now, pretend I'm an executive. I'm the one doling out all the money. I got nothing to sell for Game Pass. Everything is stalled. You creative types. Why aren't you making the games faster? What does it take for a company to get the games out faster? Do they just need to beat the developers harder? Because I don't understand it, because a lot of the complaints right now are like, again, there ain't no games on Games Pass that are like compelling, and that's attributed, people saying that's a lot of the slowdown. But like, you've got all these developers, you've got all this money. Where the hell are the games? What makes the games come out faster? I mean,
well, you have to have more teams working on games. Like the pipeline is a fixed depth, right? You're looking at a Crash game that people worked on and unbelievably hard and destroyed their personal lives and did all the things that they had to, that nobody wants to do to get the game out, is like 2 years probably at this point, because it takes it takes 2 months to clear cert at the end of your dev pipeline. So you're looking at 22 months, 20 months, with a couple of months of pre-pro and figuring out what the game actually is, and then you have to make it fun in there somewhere. It's hard. Realistically, it takes a long time to build something complicated and iterate and go through it. Now, we've seen a lot of games that came out faster dev cycles. Like your Lethal Company is a good example, where there's kind of a good hook on that game. The art fidelity is really low, and there's a high amount of jank built in. Like the jank is part of the reason you play that game, and those are the exceptions rather than the rule. Like if you look at something like Helldivers, where like that game is built on a 10-year legacy, right? Because the underlying mechanics of Helldivers 2 are basically Helldivers 1, but they shifted from a top-down kind of isometric view, action-y twin stick view, into a third-person shooter view. But they had the benefit of all the balance and design stuff work. Like, I don't want to say it's done, because there's always work to be done, but they had this really incredible base to build on, and it still took them 5 years to make that game. That's a seasoned team that's been making games for 15 years at this point. Like, it just takes a long time to make games. So that's why when I look at Microsoft shutting down studios that have successfully shipped like the idea that you can ship a game is a miracle always. Rami Ismail says that it's the most true thing ever. Like, every game that releases is a small miracle. And the fact that they're shutting down studios that have successfully shipped stuff that people actually wanted to play is asinine to me. They're throwing out the most valuable resource that they have if they want to keep making games. And then I look at things like Perfect Dark, which has been in development for 100 years, it seems like now, and seems no closer to releasing. And it's a franchise that is 20 years old, and I don't think anybody younger than us has ever heard of, right? So, like, what's their focus? What do they actually? I don't think they actually know what they want, which is the frustrating thing. Anyway, sorry, I rambled.
No.
So beat the developers harder.
Yeah, beat the developers harder.
I mean, if I were the developer too, I would ask, do you want me to use AI? And I can make our company much more efficient. But when publishers look at AI, they go, "Yikes!" Because we don't know what's going in there. If you create a large language model and pull in everything from the world and um, act like we think we own it all, but you're not sure, then the legal folks at the publisher are going to go, "You can't use that at all," right? And then the developer or the publisher then says, "Okay, just make a large language model with only our IP in it," right? But then you have to wonder whether it's AI anymore. Like a common thing for somebody to ask the AI would be like, "Oh, can you mash up, Call of Duty and Halo into a game and show me what it would look like," right? But if you only owned Halo and you didn't own the other thing, then you can't do that because of the way you just built this large language model, right? Because of the restriction of you can't use somebody else's IP or whatever. So it becomes a lot less functional as AI. And so there's all these problems like associated, like some people look to AI as like I don't know, a savior, right? When it comes to the costs related to making games. But it comes with its own different set of problems. I think that Sean Layden was, very worried about the state of where AAA games were heading, right? And he was, pointing to Red Dead, not necessarily fingering them in particular, but Red Dead Redemption took 2,000 people, and if you saw the credits, there's more like 3,000 people on it, right? And that 2,000 people to make a 100-hour game with 105 levels, that is that setting the bar for what everybody else has to do? Like, Sean was going, "This is insanity," right? Whatever happened to the great AA games that maybe gave you 10 or 20 hours, right? I don't know. So there's like a missing part of the industry now that is not possible because nobody wants to greenlight these things in sort of the middle. I did think that things were starting to get really bad when it was starting to take 7 years to get a brand new IP out the door, right? But then you look at Grand Theft Auto 6. That's going to be 13 years between when the last Grand Theft Auto shipped and when this Grand Theft Auto ships. And it's great that companies like that are doing that. But I also think that when Grand Theft Auto 6 arrives, it's going to be disaster for everybody who's not Grand Theft Auto 6, right? And if you're shipping in that year, you're out of luck because Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to sort of suck in so many of the players.
Grand Theft Auto 6 is also going to have the Sims problem where the 5 has lived for so long and there's such this big community around it that 6 is going to be underwhelming for the hardcore elite super GTA fans. So, it's kind of bad news. Like they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't on that. It's going to sell a bazillion copies and they're going to be fine. I'm not worried about 2K, but it's a situation where like the expectations are so high for those kind of games that it's hard for them to succeed. I think like I said, GTA is going to be fine. No hot takes on that here from me.
But at the same time, it's amazing to think that somebody gets a 13-year leash to develop between versions. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be a colossal hit and make a ton of money, and it'll have a bunch of bugs as well. People will hate the launcher, typical, but still, like, that is a long damn time. And let's be honest, for-profit companies, basically, you're making hubcaps, so you're making cars, and like, I don't know how you can ever account for such a long time. Like, I can't imagine what it's like for an executive to I need to make money now.
There were people who were disappointed with Starfield, right? Because look how dumb the AI is in it, right? Maybe it's the last game that ships that way. But it's underway for 10 years and there wasn't some kind of pivot they could do. just because 6 months before it ships, they get ChatGPT in this amazing new form, right? So so yeah, you get a lot of problems when the development time stretches out so long, right?
Yeah, but to me, it's like it's crazy to think that they've adopted this. The games industry has essentially replicated what happens for Hollywood, which is, you know what, we don't care about your lousy, crappy, movie that might win an award. We want a Marvel movie that's going to make us, $10 billion, right? So,
Yeah,
but then as we've seen with Marvel, the wheels are coming off,
yeah.
and suddenly it's no good. It just feels like, how the hell do you think do we really think Call of Duty is going to last 10 years without them flubbing it so badly it turns into Battlefield? I'm a Battlefield player, and believe me, it's terrible right now. But I kind of feel like at some point people get tired of it and it's over, and you don't come back from that.
I mean, the good thing is that there's competition every now and then, and so like when PUBG came out, right? Call of Duty got knocked off its feet and had to react, and luckily for them, they came up with Warzone, right? And they came up with a good battle royale reaction. I think Helldivers 2 is kind of coming in and stealing some of those players right now, and they have to think about that now too. So I like the fact that there is competition. You are right that most of the biggest AAA companies now are retreating into the franchises. Like whatever they've got, the big things, they're going to do those, and they're going to, development is so difficult that they're throwing more people onto those projects, and sometimes that's not going to work so well, right? But the thing that was supposed to fix this in the industry was the arrival of dozens of game-focused venture capitalists who can now then take those teams, some of the teams that got laid off or some of the teams that were disaffected, they could roll off out of Riot Games and get funded by the VCs. And so the new source of brand new intellectual property in the industry is still the indies, but now those indies are getting money from venture capitalists who are, betting that the brand new IP is going to beat whatever the AAA guys are reliant.
I mean, that's all well and good until the interest rates go up and the venture capital gets squeezed and the publishers clam up, and you
pointed to the second part of the disaster now.
yeah. If you look at, like, 2K is never going to have trouble getting money from somebody to spend if they go over on GTA 6, right? They'll be able to come up with a couple of bucks to cover their bills until the game's out. But the indies get squeezed and they just shut down, which is what we've seen this year and last year in enormous quantities post Embracer. Embracer bought up bought up what became the B tier games, the AA games, the big indies, the $5 to $25 million indie publishers, and then they stopped spending money when they didn't close whatever secret deal it was that they missed middle of last year.
There were some ways that were kind of funny, like I think 1 out of every 2 fundings at one point in 2022 were blockchain games, right? And the VCs were thinking, oh, blockchain is something new. The AAA guys aren't doing it. Let's pour our money into that. And then all of a sudden, there was such a large amount of money that it was taking up lots of the funding going into any game company. And so some of the developers were looking at that and going like, I'm going to pretend I have a blockchain game. I'm going to take this money, and then I'm going to go make the game I want. And then, even that strategy didn't work out so well for companies. But, it is interesting how, they could still find a way to do what they wanted. And yes, the problem we have as of last year was that things started going so bad and everybody started panicking so much that the money flowing into the venture capital companies was slowing down. And then when that happens, then they decide, okay, our plan was to fund you in 3 rounds, right? But we've revised that plan. You have to ship with 1 round, right? And then the developers are going like, uh-oh, we can't make this game that we wanted to make. with only one round of money. We need the 3 rounds. Otherwise, it's we have to reduce the scope. And so a lot of companies reduce the scope of what they were planning to do in the last year. But the slight ray of hope is that some of the funding is now turning around again. The money's becoming available again because people, I don't know, for some reason, see some light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe it's because Bitcoin prices went crazy again. I don't know, but
yeah, A16Z just announced another addition to their games fund, I think, right? And
right. 600 million.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's having lived the hey, I'm pitching games last year life for pretty much 12 months as one catastrophe escalated into the next wasn't a particularly great feeling. So I wouldn't encourage anybody to do that. It seems bad, just for the record. So anyway,
well, I guess people think the interest rates might, moderate a little bit, and the free money from the Fed will open up again. So maybe that's part of it. Who knows?
It would help for sure. I mean, I think it's the thing about games is it's a volatile, high risk industry. Even if you're talking about, a small game now that's a $5 to $25 million bet. I was gonna say the other thing that people have realized out of the kind of, because we are starting to see the first wave of the VC funded games, is that I think there's a perception that all publishers do is provide money and then magically a game comes out 2 to 3 years later or 5 years later, as the case may be. And while that is, I mean, providing money is an important service that publishers provide, and I'm not necessarily a huge fan of all publishers. There's also a lot of other stuff that publishers do in marketing and kind of launch support and all of that kind of stuff that there's not really a lot of infrastructure for outside of the publisher ecosystem. So if you're a venture funded game, you're self-publishing, like the hardest part of making a game is making and releasing a game and making it fun. The second hardest part is letting literally anyone know that your game exists, because 14,000 games released on Steam last year, and there's like 20 slots on the homepage of Steam. So you can do the math and see how competitive it is to get any kind of coverage at all on those slots, which means that the things that the publishers do, marketing, like the Keighley show in the summertime and the Nintendo showcases and the Xbox showcases, the PlayStation showcases and the EA showcases, all of those things provide real value because they let people know that your game exists and apply an imprimatur of quality on your title that otherwise is missing. So.
Will, I was just going to say, I think the problem is game reviewers. We know it's your fault.
Oh, the reviewers. Oh, man, reviewers are the worst.
Always never happy.
Nobody cares. Happy. Nobody cares about like this. The average Chud Steam review probably is more important than your IGN review these days. Bad news.
I know. But yeah, no, I mean,
getting nervous.
You got to blame the media at some point. I was going to ask a question. You got any audience questions?
I've got a couple more random audience questions, but no. Well, this one's random from friend of the show, Coffee. What upcoming games or technologies are you most excited about, Dean?
Games.
Or technology.
Well, I'm actually playing Homeworld 3 again, so that's actually fun for the kind of game that I like to play, strategy games, right? I am looking forward to whatever Treyarch has, that took them 4 years to make, right? The law for Call of Duty games, for as long as we can remember, it has been that you take no more than 3 years to make your game, right? And Treyarch was supposed to ship last year. They didn't, got something else. And so I'm looking forward to what kind of, new thing they can bring to Call of Duty. I am definitely looking forward to Grand Theft Auto 6 and it like that new feeling of emergence, I guess we're gonna get out of that game, that feeling of emergent gameplay, because they've just sort of built all these systems into the world. What's Light No Fire? Wait, no, listen. But what is the Hello Games one? They just announced the procedural game.
Oh,
Planet.
It's Light the Fire or something like that.
Somebody Google that one. But the interesting thing about that game was, Hello Games built and maintained No Man's Sky for 10 years with a team of 12 people, right? And then about 5 years ago, they took 6 of those people off and started working on this Earth-size game world. Whereas No Man's Sky is all about the galaxy. Now they just decided to make a planet and make it with a lot of procedural technology. So, this is the answer to some of all of these problems we've been pointing to. Can a team of 6 people make a gigantic game world? And yes, it's possible.
Light no fire.
You could light no
Yes.
fire.
Yeah.
Dean, do you think that there's what do you think about Rockstar hiring in the people who built the mod tools for GTA 5? Do you think that means we're going to see like actual mod support built into the game, or do you think it means what's your read on that?
Well, that does remind me of what I was going to say earlier, which is like the great new thing for the industry. When there's problems, I think of the line from Jurassic Park, where they say, "Life finds a way." Right? There's all these barriers in front of life, but it finds a way to survive and thrive. And games find a way as well. And so we're having all these troubles and problems right now. But Roblox and Fortnite, UEFN, are becoming a very viable path for a lot of game companies. I wrote a story about these 23-year-olds who are making games on Roblox now. And they had been making games for 10 years. And each one of them had a game with more than 50 million plays on Roblox. And so
That's
they were
insane.
now running companies with 30 people, 30 contractors or 30 employees or whatever. There's one Roblox company that has 200 people working for them. And it's like a new sort of point of entry into the game industry. Like if you're just, getting out of school now and coming into this horrible job market where tens of thousands of people have been laid off from game companies, there's a new point of entry for you in these kinds of games, user-generated content games or whatever. So the modding part is part of that. I do think that every publisher has to embrace what consumers have shown they want to do, which is make their own games, make their own worlds. I would love to make my own Lord of the Rings game, right? And how good that can be, it could actually get better over time with the more AI tools that I get my hands on, right? And so I think lots of forward-looking, big companies see this right now. Like they're not going out and making games on top of Roblox, but EA is looking at The Sims 5 and thinking like, okay, there's this trend that we rode with The Sims 4, and we have to, feed that even more with The Sims 5. So my hope is that something like Grand Theft Auto 6 now, instead of trying to stomp out all the copycats of Grand Theft Auto 6, embraces them, brings them in, lets them make money, right? If it turns out that one of your developers creates Dota, right?
Yeah.
It's actually a good deal to say you can do that inside our game world. We're giving you a bunch of tools to do it. You make the game. If it turns out to be a dud, oh well. If it turns out to be a hit, you give us a bunch of you give us half the revenue. Keep half, right?
Think
Maybe
of all
they keep 70%.
Yeah.
But,
Think of all the money Blizzard lost because you couldn't buy Warcraft 3 to play Dota 10 years ago, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would hope that there was maybe a more enlightened reason for acquiring the modding companies.
Another question from a friend of the show, Coffee. What recent games do you think, Dean, have pushed the boundaries of innovation? Well,
I did bring up the Hello Games thing, so there's one. Boundaries of innovation. So BuildBox, is one of those interesting AI game companies right now that is letting people build their own games. They had hits very early on back in the day with like Color Switch. It was, a game that got tens of millions of uh, downloads on mobile, and it was built by one person using the original BuildBox tools, right? And so like those tools have evolved to the point where they do have AI enabling you to go from text prompt to game, right? And so it's just one of those companies. I think that's interesting. Bitmagic is another one of those that's promising. You can get to a 3D game world game just using text prompts, right? I think one of the problems is like if you want to slightly modify these text prompts to make this game more exactly what you have in mind, that's a harder thing to do. But for you to say randomly generate a game using these text prompts, I think it's there. Like that's possible. We can all do this ourselves today, right? I like the idea that in-world AI also had for making another company called Convey, making much smarter NPCs that you could have a 20-hour conversation with if you wanted to, right? Using things like generative AI or ChatGPT or whatever to make them much more knowledgeable, so that instead of like Mass Effect, it's like I can ask 3 questions of this NPC, and once I'm done, that's it. No more. Got to move on. I do think that like nobody wants the opposite of that, which is a blacksmith that knows an encyclopedic amount of information about the world. No, you don't want that. That's going to break your illusion of what a blacksmith is, right? So, but making the blacksmith into a reasonably good conversationalist about horseshoes or something like that, hey, I'd be happy to see that. I don't know. I am always impressed with like how much technology is woven into the art of game creation, and I've never been disappointed at what I see coming out new every year.
Nice.
I have a question from actually from Brad. He had a big list of questions. I wasn't able to get to them, but this one sort of touches on that, I think, and that is, can anything stop NVIDIA right now? And of course, because you're talking about Gen AI and all we've seen some really cool demos from them, but it feels like NVIDIA is an unstoppable force in gaming and obviously AI. But is there anything that can stop them? Is Brad's question.
But definitely Moore's law has something to do with stopping. if Moore's law comes to this halt,
And earthquakes.
then, if you notice the NVIDIA chips lately, right? They're not small little things. They're not tiny things that you make once and then you shrink them down into smaller and smaller things. They're collections of chips now, and they're growing in size. They're multi-chip modules. And they've had to go that direction because of the slowdown in semiconductor technology, slowdown in Moore's law. So that is probably one of their biggest enemies right now. Is that they're using it's almost like the oil industry using fracking to get more oil out of the ground, right? Eventually, this is going to run out, and I think. There are always smaller startups that will think of something, and I think maybe NVIDIA's like their great asset and their vulnerability is that they started with graphics chips for games, and they made those ideal chips, and it turned out that through software you could turn those into great AI chips, right? If somebody say figures out how to make from the ground up better AI chips, then maybe that's the way that somebody could theoretically attack NVIDIA, right? Is that something that's just carrying less baggage from games, right? Or less baggage from the old GPUs. And so there are companies like, say, Grok is a GROQ is a startup that is trying to do different things in GPUs, in AI chips, right, in particular. And so there's tons of startups that are all getting funding in this space on the notion or the theory that they could take out NVIDIA.
That's a tall order, but I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
We're running up on time, so yeah.
Because I have another question.
Mhm.
Should I go?
No, go for it. Yeah.
So again, this gets back to my previous question of like PlayStation, Xbox. Again, they're very, very close, but it felt like PlayStation generally always had the lead over Xbox. Is assuming there is another generation of Xbox, is it possible you could see, Phil or maybe Satya calling up, Lisa Su saying, you know what, we need our next Xbox to kick the crap out of PlayStation, and we're gonna basically go back to an older model where we're just going to absorb the cost, but we'll keep it on a 7-year cycle. But we want to crush PlayStation with Xbox performance. What can you give me? Is that even within the realm of possibility? Because I feel like as much as console gamers deny it, they still are very much driven by graphics and performance, at least the buzz around it. So am I just stupid for even wondering if that could happen?
No, I mean, I do think that like there's the standardization of x86 that creates the confines in which you can operate, but there's still plenty of knobs and dials that you can twist to come up with something that's very different from what the other console maker is trying to come up with. And like choosing how many cores you're going to put in, and how many cores of what kind. Like, does your next console need to have a bunch of AI cores, right? Yeah, probably yes. And so, but while you're doing that, right, so is the other party, right? And so, like, if AMD comes up with something and says, look, within x86, we now have this great new thing. It's an AI core, right? And that's available to you, but it's also available to Sony. And so, I think it's possible. The competition is there. Great minds exist on both sides. Somebody can come up with a better, faster machine, or a machine that does the thing that people want. Like maybe I want to talk to my console instead of, I don't know, doing other things, I guess, right? Just always using the controller. And so, yeah, I don't think one side is really going to totally outdo the other. But within this horse race, maybe one horse gets their nose ahead of the other horse. It's like,
It must be really fun.
they don't realize they're on I don't know, they're like on a wagon or something. The horses are tied together.
That's a good analogy.
I just think like it would be crazy if they basically ended up being virtually identical again the next generation. So that to me would be kind of a bummer. But I just imagine like Lisa hanging up from talking to Satya and then like, hey, how long? Somebody from Sony's calling. It's president of Sony calling. It's like, oh, jeez, these guys.
Yeah. Or maybe more likely is like, I'm going to hire the CTO on PlayStation and bring them over to Xbox.
Yeah. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. Any more burning questions for Dean?
No, we probably need to wrap it up, yeah.
We're gonna wrap it up because we got to let Dean go. This has been really enlightening, and again, I think it's great because it's it after this last week, it's like, really, what the hell's going on? It actually doesn't seem like it's as end of the world as a lot of the videos I've seen on the internet. So I'm gonna.
People love to get angry,
People do love to get angry.
Actually, yeah, Dean. Last question: who should people get angry at?
Oh.
If they just want to get on the internet and get angry at somebody, who should they?
Who gets blamed?
I think they should really start to leave game developers alone a bit, right? It doesn't help to yell at them all the time or to excoriate them on social media. I think what they're doing is creating happiness for the world, right? And so, why slow them down or distract them with excessive criticism? I think that said, don't let them get away with anything that is sort of like pulling the wool over your eyes. Uh, but yeah, when it, I think having patience still always has its rewards. I think whether you're inside a company working on something that's a 10-year project, or whether you're a gamer waiting for the next big exclusive to land, patience is a good thing.
Good words. Good words.
I like it.
Okay, everybody. Check back next week for your fix of PC Talk on the Full Nerd. For audio listeners, subscribe to us on iTunes, Pocket Cast, or Spotify. And if you're on one of the services, please leave a review. Every time you do, Microsoft buys another publishing company.
No!
I know.
Oh my.
Send questions and comments to thefullnerd at PCWorld.com. Thanks for coming. I'm Gordon Ung with, I'm going to go right to left. We're going to go Will Smith.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Dean Takahashi of GamesBeat at VentureBeat.
Yeah. Oh, I also organized the GamesBeat Summit conferences, and there's one coming up next week.
Is it going to be streamed or?
We are going to have video on demand from it, but not streamed. So it's in Los Angeles and Marina del Rey on May 20th and 21st.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So if you're, and again, Dean has a couple books on Amazon. I encourage you to read them if you're into the Xbox. And going this way, and Patrick Murray.
Don't forget, on YouTube, if you watch or listen to us on YouTube, go at the Full Nerd Podcast. Go subscribe over there, because we only got a couple more times that the podcast is going to be on the PC World channel. So it's moving over there. Go subscribe.
And Willis is going to take us out.
All right. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you. Everyone, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye.